Hi everyone, today I'm going to talk to you about how I painted these beautiful white roses. I started out with a charcoal drawing out the generic shapes of the roses and some notable leaves that stood out in the scene to me. And then the first thing that I did was squint to group all of the shadows together, and I'm not painting in individual shapes yet, I'm really just painting in one dark shape for the shadow, and we'll go in and define it later. I'm also looking at the roses themselves and trying to block in the shadow side of the roses, and I later changed this color because I felt like it was too greenish, but I'm literally just trying to think of the shape of the roses as a light side and a shadow side, and then I'll refine it a little bit more after this. Here you can see me starting to shift those shadows to more of like a bluish purplish color, and the reason for that is because the shadow of these roses is going to have a bluish hue because of reflected light from the sky. It was a sunny day, and so that's where the blue color comes from. Also, I find that these white flowers really had a yellowish tinge to them, and so a lot of times the shadow color is going to be complementary. Now here you can see that I made some mistakes and I wanted to fix my drawing, so I went back over the drawing a little bit with some red paint to outline where I wanted the roses to move to, and I'm blocking in those shadow shapes. I also cut in with the generic shape around some of those leaf shapes that we saw with a much darker shadow. And so this is just a process of painting where you're making corrections as you go, and I think that's something that we all need to remember that you can do. No painting is totally lost. You can always go back over a passage and fix it. Now here I'm kind of delineating the highlights at this point and just cutting in around to create more form. And it's really a push and pull that you see here, where it's going over the shadows, going over the highlights, reasserting the shadows, reasserting the highlights, looking at shapes, putting in more blues in the shadows, putting in more shapes of the highlights, and just kind of pushing and pulling until the form of the flowers, the three-dimensionality there, kind of emerges and shows itself. I'm using a relatively smaller brush as I go along and starting to think about individual petals at this point, but even so I'm still squinting and just looking for what are the shapes and the glints of light, the colors, and that jump out at me. And out of that I'm able to just keep going a little bit brighter, a little bit darker, and modulating the shadow, modulating the light, and those things add up to something that looks relatively realistic and reads as flowers. So use these practices in your own painting. Try and find some flowers and see how it goes for you. Remember, you have a voice that matters. Go be creative. I'll see you next time.